I need someone. When I was younger, so much younger than today, I never needed anybody's help in any way. But now these days are gone, I'm not so self-assured. Now I find I've changed my mind and open up the doors. Help me if you can, I'm feeling down, and I do appreciate you being around. Help me get my feet back on the ground. Won't you please help me?
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Raw Deal. This 5th day of May 2025, right here on Studio B. Paul Huff is going to be joining me, filling in for Keith Rogers. We just learned a friend had stage 4 cancer. He's took the vaccine course. So in a way, there's no surprise there. That's how it goes, sad to say. Hopefully, Paul will be able to join momentarily. I want to begin with what I regard as a sensational development. A bill pulled as GOP defends the right to boycott Israel. Get this. An amendment to the Anti-Boycott Act of 2018, H.R. 867, was pulled from a Monday scheduled vote in the House. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene announced Sunday evening after initial news about the vote drew mass opposition across X over the weekend. From across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, and Libertarians alike voiced their opposition to the Intergovernmental Organization, or IGO, Anti-Boycott Act, waging concern that it stands as an affront to the First Amendment by compelling speech and business transactions. Sunday, Greene posted to X she would be voting no on the bill. It is my job to defend Americans' right to buy or boycott whomever they choose without the government harshly fining them or imprisoning them. What I don't understand is why we're voting on a bill on behalf of other countries and not a president's executive order that's for our country. Yes. Yes. So hopefully, as I say, Paul will be able to join. Are you trying it? Yeah. In any case, this was one of those anti-protest of Israel bills. Under the Anti-Boycott Act of 2018, an American individual, company, or organization participating in or supporting a boycott of a U.S. ally imposed by a foreign government can be fined up to $1 million and up to 20 years in prison. If H.R. 867 were to pass, it would extend the penalty to Americans participating in boycotts of U.S. allies promoted or endorsed by intergovernmental organizations such as the UN or the European Union. As it stands, there are no known instances of Americans boycotting U.S. allies besides Israel. Also, over the weekend, the Libertarian Platform, the Mises Caucus, wrote on X that anti-BDS laws restricting boycotts of Israel have long been an affront to free association and free speech. To free association and free speech. H.R. 867 is a direct violation of the First Amendment. This will grow American opposition to Israel faster, leading to more desperate regime crackdown and so on. BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, is a non-violent movement in support of Palestinians to promote the aforementioned actions against Israel. Former outspoken Democrat Ohio State Senator Nina Turner also posted to X, broad coalition in opposition to H.R. 867, Congress must vote no tomorrow. The bill was sponsored by Representative Mike Lawler of New York, co-sponsored by 19 Republicans and 5 Democrats. So to say, the GOP is standing up for the rights of Americans under the First Amendment ain't quite accurate. Given this was primarily a Republican bill, but I say good that it has been defeated. Good. Meanwhile, here we go. Good. I got to have Paul here. Paul, you there?
I am here, Jim.
Oh, I'm delighted. Listen, I was just reporting how this massive bill to punish anyone who spoke out against Israel has been withdrawn from the House, and I'm just applauding it. Your thoughts, Paul?
Well, I don't know how you would really, in any serious manner, enforce such a bill. I think that, the kind of psychological operation they're attempting to conduct has got to end only in failure, in my opinion. And I just think they're going to both irritate and awaken far more people than they would attempt to silence. So it's just another little bit of what I would call Jewish insanity, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do think it was a miscalculation. I'm very, very happy to see it go down. This is what I regard as even more despicable, as though there could hardly be such, than Trump's support for the genocide in Gaza, his cracking down on the Americans' right to protest against it. In my opinion, that is an impeachable action. I think he should never have done it, along with sending ground troops into Yemen without congressional approval, supporting the genocide and threatening war against Iran. I regard all of those as completely objectionable. And he's gone, I think, maybe way over the top. He's planning to have this parade on his birthday, and he's asking for, 660,000 troops? Why doesn't he just ask for 666, Paul? I mean, this is embarrassingly bad.
And you have to sort of ask yourself, you wonder, does he really want to do any of this? Is he just following orders? I mean, is he just receiving stage direction, because that's what it smacks of, to me. And I mean, thinking about these supposed anti-Semitic laws, can you just imagine some of the trials, or would you even be entitled to a trial? The only way such a thing could possibly work is if you have a complete control, sort of more or less a dictatorship, if you will, where due process is just out the window. And I think in some ways we kind of have that. I mean, your experience probably speaks as well to many people, where we have what I would call a simulacrum, there's a good word, of a due process justice system. But in reality, in many cases, the end results are kind of predetermined in most cases. But they want to give us the illusion that there's a process, whatever that process may be, a democratic process, a judicial process, an economic process. But I think in reality, people are now waking up to see what the score is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, I took him at his word when he said he wanted to end all these stupid wars, that he was going to be a peace president. And he's been anything but. He's been precisely the opposite. The Houthis are acting honorably in accordance with international law. They have declared war on Israel. They're carrying it out in accordance with international law, the laws of war. Even the United Nations has confirmed it. They've been interdicting shipping to Israel in solidarity with the Palestinians. They've explained they'll cease when Israel allows aid to go to the Palestinians. When Israel did have a ceasefire and allowed aid, they did cease. But now they've resumed, and so have the Houthis. Trump is misdescribing them as pirates, which is a clear evasion of the law, because otherwise what he's doing is totally illegal and, in my opinion, an impeachable offense. What happened to this guy, Paul? Was he always this way and I just was too blind to see it?
Yes. No. course, it's just speculation on our part what actually lies inside of a man, right? We only have to judge both his words and his actions, and I think that in many ways, Trump has fooled a great many people, and some of us just have had a harder time letting go of the image of or what we thought we had or what we really wanted. I mean, this is the problem that we have here in America is people are face to face with the notion that all the people in the government and the what I would call the power structure that we would expect to help us and to be on our side it's pretty much the opposite. And that's a really hard realization to come to.
I agree completely. I mean, to realize that, say, the DOD, which it appears was the origin of the COVID vax, the Department of Defense, which is supposed to be defending America's national security, could have a plot to kill Americans en masse with this vaccine. I mean, that's obscene, Paul, just obscene. And I don't know, it breaks my heart. I served with great pride as a commissioned officer in the Marine Corps. To think that my country could come to this low state is really beyond what I heretofore could have possibly ever imagined in my gravest nightmare.
Well, I think for many years, I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure it's true. The appeal that you have, in my opinion, is your sincerity. I mean, you're like a lot of people that you were brought up in a world that you perceived was a different world. It was just not as overt as it is today. I think that there's always been an undercurrent, what I call these backroom power, politics and corporate rule. But it's become extremely visible today and extremely onerous. And, here's a little thought exercise just for the fun of it. When I was younger, I used to sort of fantasize how great it would be to bring somebody like a Ben Franklin or a Thomas Jefferson forward, from the past into the future, in terms of just from a technological, point of view. In other words, just from standard of living. I thought how amazing it might be to pick up Thomas Jefferson at the airport in a Corvette, and drive him down the road, or, put him on a plane, sit him in front of a computer. I mean, all the amazing things that we've created. But can you imagine trying to explain to some of our founding fathers about the sort of thing that you had on the other week with Sasha Latypova and her work, and or, for example, the video from Anna Mahalchia about the self-replicating nanotechnology inside of our bodies? How could you possibly explain that to George Washington?
For example, oh God. Trump seems to me to have gone so far off the rails. Putin, by the way, is getting very pissed off with Ukraine. Apparently, they mounted a couple of sidewinders on drones and took out two very first line jet fighters of the Russian Federation. And he has gone so far as to say he hopes this can be resolved without resorting to nuclear weapons. Paul, that's pretty damn disturbing.
Well, what would be the point of it? Why do we have to do it? And the fact of the matter is we don't. There's no compelling need. This is just let's face it. These people are constantly engaged in what could be only described as military exercises at their whim, but they're not actual exercises for the victims of our bombs and technology. I mean, think about that. In other words, all these things that are going on in the world, all these conflicts in most cases are created. They're not really resolved.
I mean, look at this headline, Paul. Trump proposes largest military budget in history, strikes deal to support Ukraine for minerals, pulls out of peace talks with Russia and Iran, and threatens Iran with war. This is a guy who campaigned as a peace president. Give me a break. This is awful.
Well, there are there are people out there, probably friends and acquaintances of yours, and members of the audience that did attempt to warn you, if you will. And I mean, here's the thing: the rhetoric of Trump is appealing, but of course, what's behind the rhetoric is, I mean, think of Trump as a mask, and he's just covering up for other people, which is pretty much the same as all other politicians. At least as far as we know, there's not two or three Donald Trumps the way there was a couple of Joe Bidens or a couple of Hillary Clintons, right? We can thank God for small favors, huh?
Yeah, Hillary had at least 8 body doubles, even including the best, who debated Bernie Sanders on the national stage and subsequently Donald Trump. She was younger, thinner, far more healthy and attractive. I mean, it's obvious why they put her out there, where they have some kind of voice box that gives you Hillary's authentic voice, but it was a body double, and I've documented again and again many others, altogether 8, whereas Biden, the whole 4 years, we had a fake Joe Biden. I did comparisons with the real guy from Delaware. They had different shape and size of cranium, different signatures, different interaction with Jill. I mean, we had a fake imposter president for 4 years, Paul. And now it turns out he wasn't even signing any of the orders or bills that came to his desk. They were done with an auto pen that appears to have been controlled by Jill and, God forbid, his son Hunter.
Quite the quandary we're in, right? I mean, I remember that Hillary Clinton who debated Trump and Bernie Sanders, and you know she was actually quite good. And it's really what's interesting to me is the amount of time and effort that they put into the fakery.
Yeah.
You know, it's just you know, as I've often stated, and I think you can understand this now, that the best way to view what's going on in the world or in American politics is like either a science fiction movie or one of those Mission Impossible episodes back from the 70s, if you remember that TV show.
Yeah. Isn't that bizarre, Paul? Because you're absolutely right. Now, this is a guy named David Haggett who writes, it doesn't seem to matter who you pick as president. Even the guy who claims he's going to be all about stopping wars, all you get is more. Today, President Trump presented the largest military budget request in the history of the nation, $1.32 trillion. It wasn't long ago that such an amount was greater than the entire national budget. At the same time, Trump revealed today that his interest in parlaying between Russia and Ukraine was all about the energy and other mineral rights. He just signed a deal to split equal halves of Ukraine's mineral rights between the U.S. and Kiev in exchange for U.S. protection. Because even if Ukraine never becomes part of NATO, so long as the U.S. has a huge national interest in mineral rights that it is exploiting there, it'll be very much present in Ukraine for Russia. That means blowing up Ukraine risks blowing up U.S. operation, putting Russia directly into a war confrontation with the U.S. This combination of Ukraine deal and the gargantuan military budget increase means the U.S. taxpayer is on the hook to protect the licensed mineral rights of U.S. companies that'll be working the dirt in Ukraine. It could be a good deal for the U.S. financially, except that the war costs could also be endless, and they won't be paid just by the people benefiting off the mineral rights, but by the average citizen. And we may someday all find ourselves in a nuclear confrontation of the kind Trump loyalists kept saying Biden was risking. Paul, this is just outrageous. I mean, he's getting us deeper and deeper in, not out at all. I am appalled.
Well, Jim, you can. I've always loved it when you are stunned and appalled, and many of the other words that you use to describe the situation. But it's really just business as usual. I mean, in reality, This is the same sort of operation they've been engaging in for probably well over 100 years, where the defense industry and the military and corporate interests all work together under this masquerade of governmental policy, and the taxpayers are ready to foot the bill if needed. But in reality, they don't really have to directly contribute because it's all done with inflation. A lot of this money that goes to the defense industry is just sort of given or granted, if you will, to these huge defense contractors now who are just absolutely just gargantuan money consumers, and business must go on. And that's why, cars cost today what houses used to cost, and what people used to pay for a house payment, now they pay for a utility bill, and so on and so on. And this thing, I don't know how long they're going to keep it going, or they're going to try to keep it going, but these fiat money inflation situations always end in a very ugly manner, according to most people that look at history.
Plus, we have China unveiling its military mega project. Satellite images reveal construction of the largest military hub on Earth, spanning over 1,000 acres. As satellite images reveal China's ambitious construction of the world's largest underground military command center near Beijing, global tensions escalate, prompting experts to scrutinize the implications of this unprecedented development for international security dynamics. Paul, it's just getting worse and worse. Here in a nutshell, satellite images reveal China's construction of the world's largest underground military command center near Beijing. This development highlights China's strategic ambition to rival the United States and reshape the global balance of power. The project incorporates advanced technological sophistication and reflects China's long-term military vision. Regional reactions vary, with countries reassessing their security strategies amid concerns over potential geopolitical tensions. China's not going to be left behind, Paul. I mean, China has the resources to do things the United States could only dream of, and now we're so much in debt, even though I regard most of our debt really as basically an illusion. I think Trump ought to declare a jubilee and just cancel the debt completely, because it's almost all of it interest on interest to the Fed for printing the currency of the United States, which is an absurd arrangement from the beginning. As JFK observed, the Treasury Department can print our currency for no interest at all. So why pay interest to a consortium of private banks, where he, I think, was on the verge of abolishing the Fed, which was among the reasons, the multiple reasons he was taken out in Dallas. Your thoughts?
Yes, I actually have a couple of notes from 1963, the United States note as opposed to Federal Reserve note with the red seal on them. I picked them up at a coin shop many years ago. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about China, which is interesting, is they're going to have a demographic problem in the very near future. Some people are predicting a population collapse within the next 20 to 30 years. There's a lot of very interesting videos you can watch on this. But what you're looking at now, I mean, if you go on YouTube and you can watch videos of people that have, been to China and show some of the infrastructure projects, it's pretty amazing what you can accomplish when you have a racially unified and essentially a culturally unified country, where people are more or less on board, following directions, and not everybody is out for themselves. I mean, obviously, you're going to have that in any group. However, the Chinese do demonstrate sort of more of what I would call a hive mind when it comes to accomplishing things for their culture, and very clean on most of the streets in the major cities anyway. Maybe they keep it that way for tourists. But I would encourage anybody to go online, go on YouTube and watch some of the videos of China. Sure, they have their issues, their problems, no doubt about it. But I've not been to China, but I've been to other Far East countries, and how clean and well organized they are compared to American cities is quite impressive, actually, and something that we could strive for.
Yes. Now, you're projecting problems. They, of course, had the one-child policy that led to a lot of female offspring being infanticized in a preference for boys so that they have a generation of boys that don't have girls to mate with. I think that's been a problem for China, and they encounter others. Your further thoughts about how the survivability or sustainability of China as things are currently arranged?
Right. Well, and it's not just a male-female thing. That's a part of the equation. But there's a guy with a YouTube channel. His name is Peter Zeihan. It's Zeihan, I believe, Peter Zeihan. But other people have verified his work just based upon the data itself, upon the demographics, that China is going to be lacking a sufficient workforce in very short order within the next generation to generation and a half, because they simply, with the rate of growth that they had and what they're going to be required to maintain their economy, they're just not going to have the people to do it. And
Paul,
it's very
hold that thought, Paul. We'll be right back after this break.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Management would like to take a moment to thank the listeners and hosts for all their support that has made Revolution Radio one of the biggest platforms for free speech in an ever-growing dark world of censorship. Unfortunately, this platform for free speech has never been free. We need the support of the people. It is the people like you, yes, you, that keeps the station in the front lines of the battle against tyranny and oppression. Please help support Revolution Radio so free speech will not be silenced in a world that seems to be going deaf to the real truth. With your support, we will be able to become an even bigger pillar of light in a dark world.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Revolution Radio.
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, it looks like our host is taking a little bit longer break than the actual break. And Jim will be back with us shortly, hopefully.
Paul, do continue with your thoughts, my friend.
Well, you know what might be interesting for you as well as the audience is I just sent you one of several videos from Peter Zeihan. If you wanted, you could play some of it. There's some that are shorter than many that are longer, but the one that I just sent you, if you're interested, he could elaborate and maybe educate some of our audience.
Tell me about Paul. I'm looking. I do not see it.
I just sent it to your the normal email that I usually use.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for it here, Paul, and it's not here yet. I'm doing a refresh and not getting it.
Yeah, that's the mail. I use Yahoo Mail, and sometimes they do that. You can, if you want, just go to YouTube and just type in like China collapse, Peter Zeihan. You'll pull up dozens of videos.
China collapse.
Yeah, and it's going to be a combination economic and demographic collapse, because one of the things that an economy is based upon is the ability and the educational level and the ability, as well as the actual size of your labor pool. That would be people age 20 to age 40, something like that. And of course, with the
my husband's little turmeric trick changed our nights. No complaints.
Keep going.
So with an increasingly technologically sophisticated economy, you can't just have you can't maintain this with just dumb labor. And so, the fact of the matter is you have to have an educational, cultural, and technological infrastructure to be able to maintain your workforce as well as your economy. And if the people are not there, then,
is this the ballpark? This one's entitled "Rebellion in China: Why China's Collapse Closer Than You Think as Provinces Turn Against the CCP."
Yeah, cool. I don't recall having seen that particular video, but there's a number of them. And like I said, you could just, if you put in his name, Peter Zeihan, Zeihan, you'll pull up a number of 5 to 10 minute videos as well as longer ones.
Okay, I see Peter Zeihan. Don't be surprised by China's collapse. Okay, here we go. 9:48. Let's play it.
In Colorado, and if you haven't been blind and have even been marginally aware of international news, you know that the information out of China these past few weeks through July and August and into September has just been atrocious. Consumer spending is down, lending is down, which should never happen in a country that is just capitally driven. The Chinese basically force-feed capital into everything, and so lending should always be going up, and it's not. We've had the foreign minister go missing and then be dismissed. The same is now happening for the defense minister, the head of the missile forces. Information that's coming out about youth unemployment is atrocious, so they just stopped collecting the data altogether. Information on bond transactions is gone, and if you're going to try to get into a more sustainable economic structure, you obviously need a bond market. They're not collecting information on patents anymore, so supposedly the moving up the value-added scale that the Chinese have been talking about for years is now not even part of the plan. It feels like we're looking at a broad-scale societal and economic and political breakdown, and we are. The shock, though, is that this is all happening at once. And after years, if not decades, of the story of rising China and hearing that from Beijing and oftentimes from political parties in the United States and around the world, for it to all of a sudden go completely inverted seems like quite a shock. But here's the thing. It hasn't all been happening at once. It's just that this is when we're noticing it. If you look back on the last few years, things have been odd in all things China. So first, let's deal with this from the outside point of view and then from the inside point of view. So outside, think of what's gone on the last few years. We've got the Ukraine war. We've got the Iranians on the warpath. We had 4 years of the Trump administration. We had 2 years of a more internally focused situation of the Biden administration. The Europeans were dealing with the tail end of their financial crisis. The Japanese have been preoccupied with the remilitarization program. Everyone has been dealing with their own stuff. And it's only kind of now that the noise out of China has gotten so loud that we're even noticing that it's not good news anymore. As for the Chinese, two big things. Number one, COVID. For 3 years, it was nothing but COVID, and any sort of statistical release or news out of China was always viewed through the eyes of COVID. And even if there was bad news, you could always lay that at the altar of COVID. Consumption was down. Clearly, that's COVID. Problems with supply chains. That's clearly with COVID. Problems with linking their industrial production to needs in the wider world. That was because we adjusted our consumption because of COVID. And so we're only now kind of getting our first good look after years of COVID. And then also within the Chinese system that had a significant shift. When Chairman Xi, he started a series of purges under the guise of an anti-corruption campaign. And in his first 5 years, he removed every regional power center so they could never rise to national prominence. And then he went through and gutted the two factions of the previous presidents, Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin, that put him in power to make sure that they could never come back. And then he spent the last couple of years gutting the bureaucrats and the private sector of anyone who might be able to rise to national prominence. As part of that, he's removed certain sorts of data collection to make sure that they can't assist anyone from rising. So, for example, college dissertation, the information is not published anymore. It's probably not even collected anymore, so no one can take the economic route to prominence. And political biographies are no longer put together by the state. So any sort of local politician or younger politician has no way to rise in a situation that might down the road generate a potential rival. So we've seen this ever tightening information vacuum across the Chinese space. All of these things have been going on for 5 and 6 years. And during that 5 and 6 year period, we hit an inflection point that was absolutely the high point of the Chinese system. And that's largely demographic. We still don't have what I would consider to be truly accurate information, but the most recent full data to be released by the Chinese in the last 2-3 months tell us that the birth rate has dropped in China by nearly 70% since 2017. That's the fastest drop in the historical record, not of China, of humanity throughout all of recorded history. And in that time frame, if the Shanghai Academy of Sciences is right, they've overcounted their population by over 100 million people, all of whom would have been working age people under age 40, meaning that in the last 5 or 6 years, they've hit not just peak workforce in the last year, peak workforce probably in the earlier part of that process, and they just don't have enough millennials to do consumption at all. And we've seen the cost of the workforce increase by a factor of 14 or 15 in the last 22 years. So in the last 5 or 6 years in China, if you could somehow have a crystal ball and have access to all the data, especially the stuff they're not collecting anymore, we would see that they've already fallen off the cliff. And it's only in the last few months that it's become so obvious that it's cut through the clutter and the noise and the preoccupations we all have with everything else in our lives. And now it's obvious that this system is breaking down. The demographic collapse is not correctable. There are not enough people under age 40 for them to even try, even if they had the macroeconomic structures that allowed or encouraged people to have families of their own. And we're seeing an ever increasing rate of decline in terms of their industrial competitiveness. On top of that, we have the issues with the Ukraine war, with China starting to come into the crosshairs of sanctions. We have China being more and more exposed to energy and food insecurity because the Europeans have taken everything else that is proximate to them so they don't have to use Russia. And the infrastructure between Russia and China is so thin, that stuff has to go out west past Europe, through Suez or around Africa and around India and around Vietnam before getting there, making it the most exposed supply lines in the world. So we're going to see more disruptions moving forward based on what's going on in China with demographics and political ossification. And we're almost certainly going to see disruptions in their ability to access the wider world for trade and merchandise exports. And that's before you consider that the Biden administration is the most protectionist administration the United States has had at least in a century, far more so than Donald Trump. So the Chinese are getting hit from every single angle. And Chairman Xi is so purged of the system that it's an open question whether he can even become aware in a reasonable amount of time that something needs to be done, much less have the capability to come up with a coherent policy to deal with whatever the issue is as it arises.
Paul, that was from a year ago. We got others here. This is shorter, from just 3 months ago.
Why does every outdoor
I'll see what I can pull that up. But he's certainly making a rather thoroughgoing critique.
Kepler Track in New Zealand. Today I'm going to tell you a story in 3 parts about one of the disasters that is waiting China in the months and years to come. Let's start with how private folks save their money. This isn't like the United States where you have a wide variety of stocks and bonds and go international. No, everything's pretty tightly regulated, and the money can really only go easily into the big state banks. The reason for this is how the Chinese government maintains social cohesion. If the big state banks have access to the entire deposit base, they can then shove below market rate loans, well below the level of inflation, into whatever company they want in order to make sure that there's enough capital flowing through the system to employ everyone. Doesn't matter if it's productive, just matters that people have jobs so they don't protest. By doing this, they maintain full employment, but it means that people get very, very, very low rates of return. So people are always looking for other ways to get their money into something more productive so they can make an investment for themselves. So from time to time, there's a fad, and from time to time, there's a way to get money out of the country, whether it is foreign direct investment or Bitcoin or some sort of weird bond or gold. And you see money surge into these things until the government figures it out, and then they clamp it down. But about 10 years ago, Chinese people found something that the government didn't mind, and that was real estate. You could buy yourself a condo, put your money into it, and because the country was rapidly industrializing and rapidly urbanizing, there was always going to be demand for more housing. You could see upward price appreciation. So this continued on for a while, and prices did great, and the people who were early investors did great. But eventually, people started buying second homes. Now, most people in China can't afford a second home. So what happens is they get together with their friends, their relatives, their neighbors, and people they've never met, and they pool their capital to purchase a unit. And then sometimes they sell slivers of that unit to someone else. Now, anywhere else in the world, we call this asset-backed securities, and this is one of the many things that triggered the 2007 financial crisis in the United States. But in China, it's pretty par for the course. However, it's done at the private level for individual savers as opposed to corporations or banks, so, no fiduciary responsibility involved there. Well, you play this forward to today, and what's happened is that the story's changed. There are no longer people in the countryside who can come to the cities. There is no population growth. In fact, with the exception of a handful of top-tier cities, every major urban area in the country has seen significant population decline since just 2020, much less 2010. The reason for that? The birth rate has now been so low for so long. There are no longer enough people in China under age 40 to have kids that we're seeing a collapse in population, which means a collapse in housing demand. How bad is it? Don't really know. There's no good data. The Chinese government stopped collecting data on this topic years ago because they were afraid that Chairman Xi wouldn't like the results, so they're kind of flying blind. Private analysts who are not subject to the CCP's whims, the Chinese Communist Party's whims, estimate that there's probably sufficient spare housing to house more people than Brazil has, about 180 million people. Government folks who are estimating say that the real number could be more than 10 times as high, perhaps enough to house 3 billion people. Bottom line is you can't break these things down. You can't really sell the properties because they're not owned by just one person, and they're not owned by the same consortium of people. So just finding the ownership network is kind of strange. You can't just knock them down, even though there's just such huge excess supply. And a lot of people think that, maybe when the economy turns, demand will come back, but there are no longer people to generate the demand in the first place. So
Paul, that's really fascinating stuff. I think you put me on to somebody who really knows what's going on in China. Utterly fascinating. Your further thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, well, the shocking thing, I guess, if you want to use the word shocking, is when you realize, as he states and other people have stated this as well, is if we can rely on the demographic data, that the people to have children don't exist. In other words, with this decline in the birth rate, therefore, it's going to have to be, in many ways, what we could call a great reset. So when all this collapses, and we've all seen and heard the stories about the empty buildings in China, right? The ghost cities. Well, now we know why, right? And China's not the kind of place where a lot of people want to move to or are moving to. In fact, as you know, Chinese love to immigrate to other countries. So I think in many ways, you know, they could be the very paper tiger that they used to say we are. So it's another example. Yeah.
This is extremely interesting, and it reflects a problem when you have a single unified government with single policies for a very large population. If the government makes a mistake or a misjudgment, as it appears now has occurred here, it can be catastrophic. If you have a whole lot of independent entities operating in different ways using different policies, then the survivability of some in the face of adverse conditions is substantially greater than what happens when you have one monolithic facing collapse. It's similar in intel communities. When you have small groups that are competing with one another to figure out what's going on, there's a far higher success rate in establishing the truth than when you have a single monolithic. This is why one of the consequences of 9/11, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, which consolidated some 35 independent agencies, many of which had been competing with one another for intel in the past, was a calamity from the point of view of gathering reliable intelligence. You need that competition. It's just as Sir Karl Popper, the great British philosopher of science, observed. The search for truth is promoted by critical discussion and debate, but you cannot have debate if you're only allowed to adopt one point of view. So ultimately, rationality, open source, availability, free discussion is indispensable to the survivability of a society. And we've been now battling massive censorship, especially over what really I think represents the greatest threat to the American nation, namely Israel's completely rogue actions, where we're not even being allowed to criticize. I say, thank God that latest bill has been pulled. Your thoughts?
Well, that's quite the what I would call switch back to the topic du jour. You know, and I just don't know what else we can say about it. You know, clearly these people, the Israelis, the Jews, have demonstrated not just their disdain or contempt for the rest of humanity, but it seems to me they have had, at least a small group of them anyway, an unwavering goal, you know, in terms of other people's demise and destruction. At the very least, they exist to take advantage. In other words, historically, they've always been known as not just aliens, but also as parasites. This is not anything that the Germans in the time of the Third Reich invented. This was just a well-known characterization of these people. So if you look at the world as the host, okay, then they're going to, you know, engineer things a particular way, because they have to, in their mind, they have to continue the same pattern of dominance. Otherwise, they feel they're going to be destroyed. You know, it's a predicament of a very, shall we say, unbalanced and paranoid mindset. And many people have hypothesized for a very long time that there's a large percentage of these people that are mentally ill, you know, psychopathic or sociopathic. And these are the people that they seek out to give us as political leaders. right? I mean, it's no accident that, in this country, at least for the last, shall we say, minimum of 20 to 30 years that you and I have been observing, and probably longer than that, we've been given essentially very dysfunctional, corrupt, easily compromised, and in many cases, homosexual and or pedophilic personalities to vote for. So it's really just a form of, shall we say, insanity. That would be the best word I can describe.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. I think you got it exactly right. Meanwhile, we have a tension between Pakistan and India, both of which are heavily nuclear armed. Some estimates, India 180 nukes, Pakistan 170. The Indian army is larger but less capable than a Pakistani army, apart from the Sikhs, who are good fighters. A difference between them now as tensions grow is that Pakistan is a first strike policy option. India does not. So here we have a report, matter of 4 days. Pakistani army incapable of surviving beyond 96 hours before mighty Indian forces. This is a grossly misleading headline. Pakistan's ordnance factory, due to its outdated production facility, global surge in demand will be under extreme pressure if full-fledged war breaks out. Except it indicates to me why they're going to have to resort to nukes early on. New Delhi. India is preparing a strong response to avenge the Pahalgam terror attack, planned and executed from terror-sponsor Pakistan. I don't believe that. I doubt very much the attack was even real or that Pakistan had anything to do with it. Launched by its backed terrorists who killed 27 Indian civilians, mostly tourists. What happened, of course, is India responded by cutting off water to Pakistan. They have a long-standing treaty. My belief is that, in fact, India was just looking for an excuse to cut off the water to Pakistan, and I think this was a classic false flag. Paul, your thoughts?
Well, I know about as much of this issue as what you just read, maybe a little bit more based upon some other things I've heard, but I don't pay too much attention to what's going on in that part of the world, and I'm going to say something very crass and racist, but that's okay. Is the more of those people over there that kill each other, the fewer that can come here, because if there's any group of people here in this country that is detested, it's Indians. Almost everybody I know can't stand them, and they are immigrating here in larger and larger numbers. So all I can say is go Pakistan, go India. I don't.
Oh, I let that lie. Here we have now something very significant. Ports traffic down 33% last week, will drop to zero from China within 10 days. Only 5 to 7 weeks inventory in warehouses. This is from Hal Turner, who's very, very good. Gene Seroka, the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, appeared on Bloomberg Business News, revealing the ongoing trade war with China has resulted in a 33% drop in ocean container ships entering his port last week. Seroka also revealed the drop will rise to about 80% this coming week. And after that, warehouses in the U.S. only have 5 to 7 weeks of inventory, then it's all gone. The ongoing trade war is approaching a very clear moment where every American is going to see it and feel it. This trade war, made necessary because so many foreign countries have added tariffs, and restrictions to U.S. goods began on April 10th, and the very real effects are just now beginning to show up through a plunge in arriving ocean container freight. By the end of this next coming week, by Saturday, May 10th, this is the 5th, alarm bells are going to start sounding because there won't be any more incoming ocean freight to the Los Angeles from China. 1 week after that, Saturday, May 17th. No more trucked in China ocean freight arriving in Chicago. and a plummet in Chicago freight arriving in Houston a week after that, Saturday, May 24th. No more China Ocean freight arriving in New York City. From May 24th, all the warehouses, logistics centers, and distribution centers throughout the entire United States have only 5 to 7 weeks of various inventory. So 5 weeks from May 24th to June 28th. By June 28th, Americans will begin to see empty spaces on shore store shelves. It'll begin in the West Coast and rapidly move eastward. 2 weeks after that, by July 12th, the warehouses, logistics centers, and distribution centers will all be empty of China freight. Not good. Paul, your take? Is that just scare or is that real? I think it's real. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you have to break it down and ask yourself, what particularly are they referring to? In other words, these goods that are going to disappear from shelves. What product? Which goods? In other words, if you really look around and you think about it, okay, we're dealing with a consumption culture where in many ways there is insufficient consumption and excess production. That's the issue. And you couple that with the fact that since wages have not risen since the 70s, people don't have disposable income.
Hold that thought, Paul. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Great.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Was it a conspiracy? Did you know that the police in Boston were broadcasting "This is a drill, this is a drill" on bullhorns during the marathon? That the Boston Globe was tweeting that a demonstration bomb would be set off during the marathon for the benefit of bomb squad activities, and that one would be set off in 1 minute in front of the library, which happened as the Globe had announced. Peering through the smoke, you could see bodies with missing arms and legs, but there was no blood. The blood only showed up later and came out of a tube. They used amputee actors and a studio-quality smoke machine. Don't let yourself be played. Check out And Nobody Died in Boston Either. Available at moonrockbooks.com. That's moonrockbooks.com.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. And if we burn, you burn with us.
Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. But time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio.
It is no secret that the so-called mainstream media is best described as controlled propaganda. Countless news stories are either totally ignored or spun with half-truths, and because of this, essential facts and vital information are often compromised. Join Dr. Ott every Friday night on Studio B at 10 p.m. Eastern and learn why The Story Behind the Story was nominated for a Peabody Award in its second year of producing unparalleled broadcasting excellence in 1997. That is, if you really care about learning the truth.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, Paul, I'm delighted that you've been paying so much more attention to China than have I. It's valuable to have you here with me today. Give us more thoughts about this potential shortage. Walmart has said that in a couple of weeks, their shelves are going to be bare. So I think an awful lot of our products do come from China. Go right ahead. Your thoughts.
Well, I'm glad to be able to articulate more because this is one of my favorite topics. And I love to try to put things in what I would say the everyday common man perspective. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier before the break about overproduction and underconsumption, plus couple that with the fact that wages have either remained the same or declined for the last 50 years, and people have less and less disposable income anyway. And in many cases, it takes two jobs to support a household these days. You remember well how much easier it was in the 60s and the 70s into the 80s to, earn a living and get by than it is now. And, this is all engineered to make us essentially a slave class or a pauper class in the midst of abundance. So when anybody tells me the shelves are going to be empty, first of all, the first part of my response would be nonsense. And the second part would be, so what? All right, go around and look at these stores and ask yourself, how much of it do you really need and how much of it do you buy? Like, go to Walmart and just look and see what they have. What is it that you get if you go to Walmart or Costco or Safeway or any other supermarket? When you walk in there, what is it that you consistently on a regular basis buy? It's a very, very small amount of what it is they carry, and a lot of it is unnecessary. And when you're talking about other consumer products, right, whether it's going to be discretionary, household items or electronics, again, it's an overabundance. The same with cars. Okay, now I don't know what it's like where you are with metropolitan area, but here in California, you can go to any major or minor metropolitan area, and the car lots are all full. They're full of cars. The used car lots are all full. They're full of cars. You go to an electronics store like Best Buy or any of these other places, and they're full of all kinds of computers and televisions and every other object that you can think of that you could want. They're all full. And how much of it is that you actually consume, that you need, that you use? Very, very minimal. And what's happened is a lot of money has been loaned out. This started way back when, of course, I remember reading about the farming situation, starting back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, where farmers were taking out loans to buy more land so that they could produce more goods, so they could make more money. And of course, it collapsed because they were producing too much and the people didn't have the money to buy it. It's really quite insane. And it's because of our debt-based money system. So a lot of excess production is because of this debt-based money system. And then a lot of people are working two jobs to try to pay down their debt. I just talked to somebody recently, a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a while, and they're trying to decide what to do because they don't want to keep working, but at the same time, they still owe like hundreds of $1,000s on their house. And should they, maybe sell it and cash out, but they'd have to live somewhere else. They couldn't live in this area, and so on and so on. So in the end, I don't really go for all the doom and gloom stuff. And like I said, I'm not just being glib here. When they talk about the shelves are going to empty, I'm going to ask you, what's going to empty? Which items? Because there really isn't much that we need to survive in terms of what we have here. I mean, there's an apricot tree out back. Is it going to stop growing apricots? No. Are cows going to stop having baby cows? Are chickens going to stop laying eggs? So all this talk about collapse is in many ways contrived. These people are constantly wanting us to fear the sword of Damocles hanging over us, whether it's a nuclear war, an economic collapse, or, the rising threat of China. In my opinion, most of it is complete and total psychological propaganda designed to make us afraid. And if they're going to tell us there's a collapse and the shelves are going to empty, my thought is bring it on. I drive a 92 Mercedes with a straight 6-cylinder that, in my opinion, will run near forever, provided I keep changing the oil. And I feel a very similar way about my Ford pickup truck.
I had an old Mercedes myself, Paul. I got through the gray market when I was in the Marine Corps. Listen, Trump threatens sanctions against buyers of Iranian oil after U.S. Iran nuclear talks are postponed. President Donald Trump Thursday threatens sanctions on anyone who buys Iranian oil. A warning they came after planned talks over Tehran's rapidly advancing nuclear program were postponed. That's also misleading because their nuclear program has nothing to do with weapons. So they're constantly trading on this ambiguity promoted by Bibi Netanyahu. Trump appears to have fallen for it hook, line, and sinker, or he's just using it as a cover story for shenanigans. I find all this quite disgusting. Trump wrote on social media, all purchasers of Iranian oil or petrochemical products must stop now. He said any country or person who buys these products from Iran will not be able to do business with the United States in any way, shape, or form. This is extortion. It was unclear how Trump would implement such a ban as he threatened to levy secondary sanctions on nations that import Iranian oil. But his statement rests further escalating tension with China, Iran's leading customer, at a time when the relationship is severely strained over the U.S. president's tariffs. Paul, I think Trump policies are a recipe for disaster. Your thoughts?
Well, as you've often stated, Iran is a peaceful nation, and I believe almost none of the propaganda about sponsor of terrorism, as you have pointed out, and many others as well, that the United States is probably the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world. And so who really knows what's at play? We can only speculate as to why these people, and we know who these people are, have it in for Iran. But apparently they do. And I mean, who the heck cares what, where the oil comes from, provided that, the oil does what it's supposed to do, such as lubricate my 92 Mercedes 300E.
I had a 280S, very nice, very wonderful cars. I'm thrilled with them. Mine, I had a silver blue with a sunroof, wonderful car. Colonel McGraver, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say too, it's funny because the since I've had this thing, I've only had it for about 3 years, right? Prior to that, I had a 2001, which is fine. But people have just told me, many people, including some mechanics, don't buy a newer car. Said anything, pretty much anything after about 2002 to 2004, they said it's all crap. You just want to buy, because in many ways they've engineered this stuff. That's the other thing about this overproduction and underconsumption, is when you make stuff to last, right, quality products, you don't really have to worry about, this constant replenishing of shelves, as they say. The only reason they're doing that is so-called planned obsolescence, and people just, they get rid of stuff and buy something new. But, anyway, go on.
No, that's excellent, Paul. You make a great point. Here's Colonel McGregor. Putin taking Kiev, a real possibility. Here he is with Colonel Davis. I'm a huge fan of McGregor. I think he's the best geopolitical commentator in the world. Here we have him.
Step forward to remove him, if for no other reason to save what's left of the country. But that doesn't seem to be possible.
But your contention is that Putin has self-restrained, but there's something maybe coming to take that restraint off.
Well, the restraint insofar as move to the river and then potentially cross and take Kiev, I think that's a real possibility now. Because after all, he in his mind, and I think in the minds of most Russians, they've held up long enough. They have slowed down long enough. They've tried to give the opposition multiple opportunities. They have talked with us and hoped that we would ultimately come around to understanding that they are not the ones who are promoting this war and prolonging it. It is, in fact, Zelensky. I mean, President Trump has said over and over and over again, I want the killing to stop. Well, you do that by stopping the aid to Zelensky and his heinous regime that is built on a mountain of lies. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah,
I'm dead.
Yeah, I honestly think that is it's viewed in some quarters as being cruel, but I think that's probably the absolute best, most moral thing he could do for the Ukrainians who are still alive. But we'll see what he ends up doing that. Now, so I showed you some problems in Europe, in Kiev, about how they're viewing it. Now, let me show you that, unfortunately, it's not just those folks. There's some people who are a little bit disconnected in the United States. Now, this morning on our earlier show, we showed Representative Adam Smith, who was taking the Trump to task and said, he's just giving in to Putin. He needs to, put more pressure on him. That'll show Putin who's who. So you can say, well, that's just a Democrat. Of course, he's from the Obama administration, the party, and they just want to go down that path, and he wants to hammer Trump. But here's somebody in the Senate from the Republican side.
We're in a knife fight with Russia and China and Iran, and the Biden people wanted to quote Socrates to them. Putin has reneged on every promise that he has made to President Trump. His latest proposal is, nothing. He wants to keep all the territory that he's taken. He wants to prohibit Ukraine from joining NATO, and he wants America and Europe to stop helping Ukraine. I think that Putin thinks that America has taken the bullet train to Chunktown. I think he thinks we're afraid of him. He has jacked around President Trump at every turn. He has disrespected our president. I don't think it's going to get any better until we make it clear to Mr. Putin that we are willing to turn him and his country into fish food. And I'm not talking about nuclear weapons or nuclear war. I would start with oil.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. I want to start with one of his first ones here, because I don't want to just dismiss this whole thing, because he says a number of things which are echoing what a lot of people say, and I'd like your view on them. First of all, this issue that Putin has reneged on every promise he's made. Is there any truth to that?
I'm unaware of any promises made by President Putin other than to comply with Trump's wishes in giving peace a chance. He was always willing to halt operations if, in fact, the Ukrainians halted them. He's always been willing to sit down and talk to the Ukrainians. Remember, he was willing to negotiate with them and bring an end to the conflict in April in Istanbul in 2022. I don't know what the man's talking about. This sounds like neocon propaganda. You know, it's kind of interesting. The left, when you hear it from Democrats, keep in mind the Democrats were permanent apologists for Stalin and the Soviet system for decades. I grew up with that. They were always apologizing and trying to justify the horrors of communism in the Soviet state. They were in the front line to attack Goldwater, Reagan, Nixon, everyone who was fundamentally anti-Soviet and anti-communist. Now, all of a sudden, they've decided there's something positive and good about this strange character, Zelensky, who's really originally born in Russia and speaks Russian and is by no means a true Ukrainian. But beyond that, they seem to think he is morally superior. And we know from the heinous crimes committed by the Ukrainians against the Russian civil population, against their soldiers, nothing could be further from the truth. I don't know why he's decided to do this. Maybe this is his way of supporting, or he thinks he's supporting President Trump. And the notion that you're gonna hurt the Russians in connection with oil is almost laughable. I don't know where he gets that. I guess he's not aware of the oil production capacity in Russia, nor is he aware of BRICS and all the other nations in the world that are quite happy to do business with Russia, most of whom are not very happy to do business with us anymore, thanks to the terrible tariffs that have been imposed. So I don't know what the man is talking about. He's a strange duck, and maybe that appeals to his electorate. You know, there are lots of people in lots of states that like to talk in bellicose terms. I can't conceive of anything more damaging, more destructive than engaging in a conventional war, a high-end conventional war with Russia. This man's obviously learned nothing from what's happened in Ukraine, because what's happened in Ukraine is a modest example of what could be done to us in Europe. We still have troops in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, probably in Moldova. I don't know. If he thinks they somehow or another could put up effective defenses against the Russians in an all-out assault by a nation, quite frankly, that's ready to go to total mobilization. Russia is only a few steps away from complete mobilization and total war. We are ages away from that, and he doesn't seem to understand it. He doesn't understand that our stocks of munitions, of precision-guided munitions, all of those things are at an all-time low. They are ready to fight. We are not.
Yeah, and then, in fact, that's one of the things that in one of his second comment there, that he, I think inadvertently, actually is accurate, but he says it as though it's some avoidable choice. He said, but, you know, when we're wanting to give them everything, we're going to give them land, we're going to give them no NATO, we're going to give them, you know, demilitarization, denazification, all those kind of things that were part of that deal. And he's like, he just wants it all, is the way he put it there. And I was thinking as I'm listening to it, I'm going, because he can take it all.
Well, maybe, but I think the larger issue for Senator Kennedy is he should be a lot more concerned about the survival of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid financially in this country. He, along with his colleagues, have presided over this massive fiat explosion of cash and money, inflation. We are on the cliff's edge of going over into financial ruin. That's where he ought to be focused, not telling us that we should be prepared to go to war 7,000 miles away from our home in a country that is of no strategic importance to us and never has been, against another country that frankly is not our enemy. This business of a knife fight with Russia and China is nonsense. Our disputes with the Chinese are largely economic, and the Chinese are willing to talk to us. But if we decide to carry the fight to China, we'll end up fighting over some ridiculous place like Taiwan and losing. Because in both cases, you're fighting the enemy on the enemy's grounds. Where does Russia have an advantage? In Eastern Europe. Where does China have an advantage? In Asia. This is stupid. This is monumentally stupid. And there's no excuse for it, except that I guess that goes down well with the folks back home.
I got to add, Paul, I've long liked Senator Kennedy. I thought he had a certain charm. He's got a wonderful manner, but here he's completely off the wall. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's making colossally stupid remarks. Colonel McGregor is dissecting him from A to Z, top to bottom, inside out. What he is saying is ridiculous. There's no correspondence to reality. And this talk about fish food, give me a break. What's happened to the guy? Paul, any thoughts?
Well, when I heard the voice played on the air the way you just did, it sounded like a woman to me. I mean, I didn't know who it was at first. So, yeah. Bellicose would be the best word to describe a lot of these people. He's just a bloviating bag of bellicose blather, and who cares what he says? I mean, in reality, what's going on is in many cases been misrepresented. I believe that McGregor has got the accurate assessment for the most part, and we just have to keep reminding ourselves that why is this occurring? Does the average Ukrainian want to be out in the field fighting? Does the average Russian want to be out in the field fighting? No. It's like this. It's the same story all the time. The common man does not want war. Who wants war, and whose interest is served by war? And I think that answer is pretty well understood by now.
Yeah, have you paid attention to the fires in Israel, which seem to have been set by settlers in the West Bank and got out of control? Your thoughts? Paul, I get the feeling that Israeli society is in chaos, that it's not being reported in the West. But if you get into Israeli newspapers published in Hebrew, things are chaotic. That the population doesn't want the slaughter of Palestinians to continue, that they're fed up with Netanyahu. They'd love to get rid of him, but he hangs on in spite of it. He's got more lives than a cat.
Yeah, that's not anything I could really speak to. Again, it would just be speculation. What you just told me does not surprise me. I don't believe that there's a government on earth that could sustain the support and the morale of the population when it performs these immoral acts, and including our own, as we saw here with the Vietnam War is just one example. Again, the people that rule this world, the people that rule this country and other countries, they maintain it through a series of illusion and outright intimidation, assassination, fraud, deception. This is not the kind of world that people like you and I would agree to or would form and build ourselves. We're just sort of more or less born into it, and for the most part, we're observers and spectators. We can provide the proper commentary, I think, but in the end, you probably have experienced some of the same frustrating thoughts that I have, right? Like, what can we do about it?
Yeah. I say, thank goodness they pulled that bill of fines and prisons for opposing Israel. Paul, just outrageous. Here's an article before they pulled the bill. U.S. House of Representatives at the vote on a controversial bill that proposes fines or prison terms for Americans participating in boycotts of Israel or Israeli settlements, promoted by international governmental organizations such as UN or the EU. The House is scheduled to vote Monday on the contentious Anti-Boycott Act, which seeks to penalize American citizens with fines of up to $1 million or prison terms as long as 20 years for boycotting the Israeli regime. Sponsored by pro-Israel Congressman Mike Lawler and Josh Gottheimer, the bill will broaden the U.S. anti-boycott law by targeting voluntary, values-based political actions undertaken by American citizens. The underlying objective is to shield the Israeli regime from nonviolent international pressure campaigns, notably the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Rights group warned that legislation will criminalize constitutionally protected political expression. The move, according to rights groups, is part of a broader push by the U.S. government to suppress opposition to Israeli genocide, apartheid, and illegal settlement expansion under the guise of fighting anti-Semitism. That's 100% right, Paul. That's 100% right. I'm just glad the bill has been pulled.
Well, I would temper your gladness with the realization that it's not going to stop. They just dipped their toe in the water is all they did. They're not going to give this up. I mean, this has all been heading in one direction for the last 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, you know it's been accelerating. So it's going to come to a point where open hostility is going to exist and commence, in my opinion. I mean, like I said, this is just a little what some people, I guess, would call a trial balloon. So it's whatever they can get away with, as you well know. I mean, look at the whole COVID operation that just took place over several years. It was well planned and well thought out ahead of time. And they may not do something exactly like that, but they collected all kinds of useful data from that. And you can be sure that they're going to continue to do similar things. And this is not the first or the last anti-Semitism bill that's going to be proposed.
Yeah, it's just so grotesque. What do you think, Paul? Spitballing, as it were. What's the best way to deal with this administration, which, in my opinion, is gone off the rails? I mean, I was so supportive of this guy for so long. I admit now I was played. Because if this was always his intent, and in retrospect, I think it was always his intent, to be the best president Israel has ever had, turning the U.S. into the United States of Israel. What can we do? I'll pursue this with you after the break, when I'll give out the number for callers to join us. Be right back.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Management would like to take a moment to thank the listeners and hosts for all their support that has made Revolution Radio one of the biggest platforms for free speech in an ever-growing dark world of censorship. Unfortunately, this platform for free speech has never been free. We need the support of the people. It is the people like you, yes, you, that keeps the station in the front lines of the battle against tyranny and oppression. Please help support Revolution Radio so free speech will not be silenced in a world that seems to be going deaf to the real truth. With your support, we will be able to become an even bigger pillar of light in a dark world.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Revolution Radio.
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
Even the government admits that 9/11 was a conspiracy. But did you know that it was an inside job? That Osama had nothing to do with it? That the Twin Towers were blown apart by a sophisticated arrangement of mini or micro nukes? That Building 7 collapsed 7 hours later because of explosives planted in the building? Barry Jennings was there. He heard them go off and felt himself stepping over dead people. The U.S. Geological Survey conducted studies of dust gathered from 35 locations in Lower Manhattan and found elements that would not have been there had this not been a nuclear event. Ironically, that means the government's own evidence contradicts the government's official position. 9/11 was brought to us compliments of the CIA, the neocons in the Department of Defense, and the Mossad. Don't let yourself be played. Read America Nuked on 9/11. Available at moonrockbooks.com. That's moonrockbooks.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, we do have a first caller joining us. The number 608-957-8727, 608-957-8727. Call to join a conversation with Paul and me, area code 408. Paul, that's your number, of course. Let me see here. 854. Join a conversation, 854. First name and state, please.
I think are you talking to me?
843? I am, Brian.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, I've got a new number. My girlfriend decided, to get on her plan and save money. So that other number's gone. So
all right.
Anyway, always enjoy it when you have Paul. Paul's intuition is through the roof. Okay. It was December 12th to 24, 12/12 to 24, there was a post online that said, if you do what I do, I've explained how I go up to these chakras above my crown and get information and bring down that Archangel Machelziak, some name like this, he have information for you. So I did it twice that day, and I got all this information. It's where I got that information about Jews backwards is sewage, and raw sewage is really bad, and raw backwards is war. So with Jews, you get war, okay, and the lying, and they showed me now why we get the term bullshit. We know why we get full of shit, and all that. It all relates to raw sewage. But anyway, they showed me the other night how planet Earth was created. And it's nothing like what you think. And when they're showing me this, I kept going, well, now I get why Paul says, my back went out, it's killing me. Anyway, Paul said a lot of the things he says, and I had no idea. So his intuition is through the roof. And if he was doing the things I'm doing, I don't know where he'd end up. So,
Paul, I don't know how you respond to that, but give it a go, Paul.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words there, Brian. I appreciate it. I can't claim I do any hard work to get it. It's just it reminds me of a line from a comedy series I saw years ago when somebody, the situation is, or the actual series is unimportant, but I think one of the person says, well, how do you know all this? And the person responds, I live and breathe, my friend. I live and breathe.
We have the second caller standing by. Is at 501 area code. Join. Please give us first name and state. 501.
Gabriel from Arkansas.
Go ahead, Gabriel. Welcome back.
Thank you. I was listening to your news while I was working as best I could, but I wanted to ask about the Trump and the regarding the military. So he never served in the military, and he's commander in chief, and he's doing these horrible things as commander in chief, right? By supporting Israel and the genocide. But what about, I wanted to kick around the idea, about the military's relationship to Trump and whether they can remove him or even just not follow his orders because they're so illegal and unconstitutional and they violate international law. But I mean, you keep, I believe it's McGregor is the one you keep playing audio clips from. I'd love to hear his opinion on this as well. But I don't see why they can't just remove him by force because of the crimes and stuff that he's committed and that he's supporting and complicit with, or at least just don't obey him. Stand down.
Well,
what are your thoughts?
Well, this is very complicated. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you have an obligation not to follow illegal orders, but given the constitutional arrangement, the president is the commander-in-chief, and there's a presumption that his orders are legal. It would be an act of treason to not follow. Milley actually did not follow. I think he ought to be tried and prosecuted for treason. He was outrageous in what he did here. Now, the situation, because what's going on, such as sending troops to Yemen, does appear to be in violation of the law that he's required to obtain the consent of the Senate before he can do that. Minimally, he's describing them as pirates, which creates an exemption because under international law, you're entitled to deal with pirates virtually any way you choose. That's why he's calling the Houthis, who are clearly not pirates, pirates. I think the situation is fraught with hazard of all kinds. Paul, your thoughts in relation to Gabriel's question?
So, Gabriel, did you hear Jim's show with Sasha Latypova, or have you heard any of her other interviews?
Unfortunately, I may not have, although I try to listen to everything I can with Professor Fetzer.
Well, just go ahead and subscribe to her Substack and catch that show, which was last Friday, if I'm not mistaken, Jim.
Yeah.
And she makes clear. Others have confirmed this as well. In fact, she just did a recent interview and covered the same thing. So everything is run out of the Department of Defense, and these political leaders just go along with the program. That's all they do. So when you listen to her show, and she talks about the various dates where this occurred and that occurred, and obviously this program that they're pursuing is handed down from somewhere outside of the political arena, and these politicians, such as Trump, are more or less just going along with it. So they're going to have a certain amount of leeway, I guess you would say latitude, but in the end, they are merely actors on the stage reading lines, if you will. So you can be pretty sure that whatever Trump is doing or not doing, that's what the military wants. Just think of how far back, how long ago Eisenhower said the term military-industrial complex. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a combination of
Brian,
intel. Go ahead.
I'm sorry,
well,
Paul. You finish your thought.
I said we're just looking at a simple combination of the intel agencies with the large defense contractor corporations, right? And this military structure, which has been in place for a very long time. And as Jim has covered, that the CIA infiltrated and had reporters in all the major newsrooms by the 60s, the early 70s at the latest. So we're looking at a very, very controlled machine. And unfortunately, most politics, that's just my opinion, I'm sure Brian would agree, most politics are more or less just an illusion.
Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
they're Freemasons. A lot of them, if you look at Haig, who was the general in charge of the slaughter of the British in World War I at the Somme, he was a Freemason. Okay, you look at Eisenhower, who was our 5-star in World War II. He was on the Council of Foreign Relations. So you're going to find all of those that go up the ladder, they're vetted. They're vetted for evil. They won't get to those top rungs unless they do what Rothschild and all the other dark controllers demand. So it's pretty simple.
But you're not a Freemason, though, and if they are doing those things and they're Freemasons, they are violating Masonic law. I just want to make that point. And it is possible that Freemasons are violating their own Masonic law. That would be very sad, and they could be brought up on charges within the fraternity. But I wanted to talk about Eisenhower. You mentioned him. Now, Eisenhower threatened Area 51, that he was going to invade Area 51 with the First Army from Colorado if they didn't report back to Washington about what the hell was going on over in Area 51. And a lot of people don't talk about that.
That's very, very interesting. Brian, are you familiar with any of this?
Yeah, but you have to remember, too, how many millions of Germans did he kill on the Rhine River after World War II by starving them to death?
Brian, we know that. I'm asking about this Area 51 thing. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I know that he was in cahoots with the Greys because the Germans were part of the tall whites. So, and they violated the agreements that they had. And so I think he was upset about that. But
that's anyway. Unlikely. That's unlikely. Why would Eisenhower warn us about the industrial complex and then make deals with Greys that are against humanity? I believe that the same people that made up that story about him making up the deal with the Greys are the same ones who are keeping all this stuff behind the scenes. And Eisenhower, why would he threaten to invade Area 51 with the First Army from Colorado if they didn't report back to Washington, if he was going to go and make a deal with the Greys? The deal with the Greys, there's no evidence to support that happened. And it totally goes against the character of Eisenhower, who warned us about the military-industrial complex.
So let me ask you a question. So do you have a source for this claim? I mean, I don't know if I've heard that particular claim before, the First Army from Colorado. So where did you find this or hear this?
CIA agent Krupa, before he died on his death, made a deathbed confession. I hope I'm pronouncing the last name correct, Krupa. But he was in charge of the CIA for the entire East Coast. But he made a deathbed confession to the famous ufologist, the most popular one who's considered the most credible, with the glasses there, the older gentleman. I'm trying to recall his name now.
Stanton Friedman?
No, even more famous than that. The one that Stanton Friedman passed away, but the one that's still alive. I forget his name.
Stephen Bassett?
No, this one's the most famous one that's still alive, the ufologist, the one that's considered the leading authority now that Stanton Friedman died. His name escapes me, though.
I couldn't tell you.
Quick Google search should bring up his name. The world's leading ufologist.
My personal opinion is all that stuff is again to be taken with a grain of salt. I don't know if I believe or I disbelieve, but it's certainly distraction. That's for sure.
Paul, I share that skepticism. I've never been convinced about alien, ET visitations. There are an awful lot of people who support it. Perhaps it's my own lack of diligence in not pursuing it far enough. Gabriel, how convinced are you of extraterrestrial visitations to Earth?
I believe that it's real, but what's happening is it's being twisted around. And what it is these are spiritual beings that are actually related to humanity, and they're being presented as alien beings that are a threat to humanity.
What do you mean by spiritual beings related to humanity? Can you spell that out?
Sure, I'll give you an example. The angels are something that a lot of people talk about and a lot of Christians believe in. And so that would be an example of a spiritual being that's not a human.
I was distracted.
Okay.
Repeat that again, please. Please repeat that, Gabriel.
So, for example, an example of a spiritual being would be the angels. People, they refer to angels in Christianity and stuff like that. That would be an example of a spiritual being. What happens is they're presenting these spiritual beings, and Stephen Greer talks about this a lot. They're presenting these spiritual beings that are actually closely related to humanity, and they're presenting them as aliens that are a threat to humanity. But
the problem I have with spiritual beings is they appear to be undetectable by observation, measurement, or experiment. How do we know there are such spiritual beings?
Right.
Isn't that an article of faith? Isn't that an article of faith, Gabriel? Something we believe, even though there may be no evidence to confirm or disconfirm it?
Well, so here's the interest. So that's a little bit of a side track we're getting on here. But I would just say this. The material evidence supposedly for extraterrestrial craft and beings is pretty overwhelming. I remember I used to be into the topic. I've gone to UFO conventions before. I've read a few books on the topic. It's quite interesting. And it's claimed that if you were to bring into a court of law all the evidence that's been gathered over decades, that the case for the existence of, extraterrestrial phenomenon, people's interaction with either craft or beings, the case would be overwhelming if it was to be presented in front of a jury. But again, most of it is going to be eyewitness testimony, as we know, you can't substantiate it. Now, the most fascinating physical aspect was the work that I believe Roger Lear, a doctor, used to remove implants from people. So people had been implanted with devices that apparently or supposedly could not or were not manufactured here on Earth, and that these aliens had selected certain, people to track the way we would track some animals. And again, that's a whole interesting sidelight. So there's material evidence from that. Go ahead.
I'm willing to bet Brian has things he wants to say about all this. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, one way you can do it is you sleep with one. Okay. I slept with an Andromedan. All right. They're humanoid. They're blue. Right. They're kind of tall. And, you just get a quartz crystal. You in this case, it was a little different. You call them in. And I had an affair with one, but I broke it off because what kind of freaked me out, they're aquatic. Okay. So their planet is just like nothing but water. And when she would open her mouth and look at me, her teeth were like fish teeth. And I said, I just can't handle this. So that was the end of it. But you're feeling it. I felt it. Okay.
Fish teeth. You mean sort of like pointed, like shark's teeth?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't like that. When she's talking to me, I'm seeing her out of my third eye, and I'm going, this is just too weird. And now what's interesting, if you get your companion Bible from Bollinger that was written in 1910, 12, wherever, and then that takes you through everything the dark did to the Bible. And, the Bible actually says the gods created heaven and earth. It doesn't say God. That was the evil Yahweh, trying to take over everything, basically to control us. To just have one God, then they can control you. But then the things that this Archangel Melchizedek was showing me is, this planet is Gaia. All right. And when you look at a rainbow, you're looking at her chakras. I have chakras. When I do what I do every day, I'm looking at my chakras, just like on a rainbow. And that she's Andromedan, and that this planet was actually created by the Andromedans. And Zeus created Jupiter. And he was from Sirius B. And it just goes on and on. Prometheus created the sun. And I don't know his planet. I never got that information. But all these alien races created this place, is what I was showing. And they showed me how they did it here. The pyramids that we have in Egypt, okay, they were flowing in, and this was just like a big cosmic dust cloud. There was nothing here. And they put it where they did, and it relates perfectly to the Orion Belt, and there's even Draco in the Orion Belt. So they were part of it. This is what Paul was talking about the other day. I go, that Paul, he knows his stuff. and then they created the planet, and then when it was created, they bored out under those pyramids that were brought in.
They brought in the pyramids, Brian. I mean, give me that's.
I know, but
ludicrous. This thing's
I know it seems ludicrous.
Tons. No, Brian.
Well, but it's just like, I know. But remember, we were talking was it Keith, and he said the moon is hollow, and that
it cannot be hollow. It cannot.
It is. The Russians launched a missile at it and hit it, and it rang like a hollow bell. Okay, you can look it up online. That's how things are created. Everything we get is just total bullshit.
Brian, that goes along with the idea of Earth being hollow. If you change the mass, their physics is completely different. There's no possible way Earth or moon are hollow. No possible way. Total bullshit. I'm guaranteeing you.
I won't. I will believe that it is hollow by just look at the Russian studies.
Do you believe it? Brian, I dare say you believe a lot of things most of us do not. I respect that. You're entitled to it. There you are. Paul, your thoughts.
I don't know what to say about that. I think that we have encountered more new ground with Brian and his thoughts. It's fascinating,
but it fits so perfectly because here's this Draco thing, and they actually contributed to the formation of this world. That's why we've always had them, and they've been such a pain in the ass. And it's where you come in, because the Dracos created black people. Okay, now their souls are light, but the worst thing you can do is sleep with a black person.
Brian,
you're just going off the
evolution contradicts all this nonsense you're spousing. I'm really kind of taken aback. You're making this stuff up. This is ridiculous.
I'm telling you what I get. I'm just giving you what I download. Okay. So it's interesting.
But you're wandering all with Draco and black people and me. What the hell are you talking about? I mean, sometimes it's interesting, and other times it's like, I just want to have you committed. But again,
I know. Well, it's how I get it. That's why I go everywhere, because I'm getting bombarded with all this stuff when I sleep and whatnot. And you wake up and you're like,
bombard yourself. Listen to me for a second. Bombard yourself with this. Go online. You could probably find it. Maybe you've already seen it. A video from it's a YouTube. There was a Russian scientist as early as, I believe, the early 60s, who said, and this is an interesting whole thing, that the moon is plasma, which I found to be quite interesting. Yeah. So have you ever seen that?
Read the one where they launched the rocket, hit the moon, it rang like a just boing.
I don't believe that.
Please,
so you'll find it.
Anybody?
Please.
Well, anyway, I mean, and think about it. How weird is it that the moon only shows one side as it goes around?
Look it up for out loud. This is not.
I just go with what I get. Okay, and now you guys.
But who cares about that?
At some point, you will.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Gabriel. Give us a few thoughts, Gabriel. Then a few thoughts from Paul. Then I have a statement to make. Go ahead, Gabriel. A final thought.
You should find this interesting. There was actually a plan to nuke the moon. It was called Project A119. You could look that up. I covered that a couple of years ago on my YouTube channel. But some footage actually surfaced that supposedly showed them trying to nuke the moon. And I believe that that's what the gentleman Brian was referring to, that supposedly they say that when they tried to nuke the moon, that it rang hollow.
Yeah, it's nonsense. I spent time in that whole scene, that whole genre. I've been to conventions before where Richard Hoagland spoke. I have a couple of his books. I mean,
Richard Hoagland. That's I was talking about Richard. That's who I was thinking of, by the way. Thank you, Richard Hoagland. He's the one that.
Okay, so listen. So I read his book. And ultimately, a lot of those people are just full of shit. When you understand what the fraudulent nature of the whole space program, ain't nobody hit the moon with a rocket ever, period. Us, the Russians, the Chinese, nobody's ever sent anything to Mars. It's all a fraud. The space station, the International Space Station is a fraud. Everything is total bullshit. Ain't nobody sent no rocket or probe to the moon or Mars or anywhere else.
Listen, this is all delightful, a little bizarre, obviously on the fringe. Thank you all for your participation, and Paul, especially you for joining me today on short notice. Most welcome. We'll do it again, Paul. I want to let everyone out there understand I'm under massive attack by a bizarre guy. Some think he's a lunatic. I think he's a character assassin. I have reason to believe he's being paid for these attacks. He's made literally hundreds of videos attacking me and my colleagues. And I think it's attempting to do a character assassination because they're afraid that my Sandy Hook case, where I have 4 different appeals before the Court of Appeals District Court right here in Wisconsin, are going to reverse the case. They want to trash me. Please go to Open Letter to Victor Hugo Vaca Jr. on my blog at jameshfetzer.org. And if you believe you want to lend a hand to me to fight this, I just need to raise a couple of grand. I got to take legal action. Go to givesendgo.com/fundingfetzer. givesendgo.com/fundingfetzer.